So let's actually talk about how serious Australia is about dealing with the divide between Indigenous Australians and other Australians. And I hate the discussion about that, I really do. And anyone who is only half watching this show, I suggest go and find some of the stuff I've had to say in the past about Indigenous abuse, because it enrages me how little conversation this has. We spoke to Jacinta Price, a proud member of the Indigenous community, but more important than that, of course, a proud Australian. She lives in Alice Springs. She could go and do whatever the heck she wants around the world, and certainly anything she wants to do in this country, but she stays in Alice Springs, where she's a local councillor, and she joins us there right now. Jacinta, firstly, thanks for the chat again. At the end of last week, we touched on a conversation that is the truly uncomfortable conversation. And when people want to hold up signs saying 400 odd people that have died in custody, you can hold up signs with way bigger numbers that are people who are suffering within their own communities, but we just don't want to talk about it. And you didn't see any discussion about that this weekend.
Absolutely no discussion whatsoever of that kind this weekend. And just watching the footage of protesters and the conversations around white privilege makes me sick to my stomach. These are narcissists. It's nothing more. It's not about anyone else's lives but their own. And the idea that they can pump themselves up and make themselves feel virtuous by claiming to support, half the time, these protesters and these supporters don't really know what it is they're attempting to support. They don't have to do any hard work, but just appear as though they care, and that's enough for them. Because if you had half a brain, you would understand that if you really wanted to reduce Indigenous deaths in custody, which of course we all know isn't as many as non-Indigenous deaths in custody, and that more people die outside of custody than in custody. But if you, in fact, wanted to reduce those numbers and reduce the rates of incarceration, then you would begin with being honest about the fact that almost 70% of Aboriginal people, men and women incarcerated, are incarcerated for acts of violence against their loved ones. Now, for a lot of women, it's because they've had enough of the violence and the abuse that they've suffered at the hands of their partners, and they've retaliated. But on the other side of the coin, we're talking about nasty individuals who think that it's their right to hurt and maim and kill their own loved ones. So if we were serious, we'd want to say, let's stop let's lower incarceration rates. Let's lower the rates of people in our own families who are committing crimes against our own loved ones. It's that simple, but people don't care about that. It doesn't make you feel good to stand up and say these things.
Well, but also it's that thing, it doesn't make you look good. That's the thing, it doesn't make you look good on Twitter. It's harder to do than a hashtag. It's harder to even have these conversations. I mean, like I remember a conversation a long time ago, when we first started talking about this here, who said, mate, look, I get it that it's really important, but it's a bit of a turn off. I don't give a shit. Like, if this is my view is, if you have access to a microphone and a camera, when the report comes out from the Northern Territory about child protection and shows 23,000 child protection orders were delivered in an area that's only got 250,000 people in it. Now, for all this, I understand, look, the deaths in custody in 20 years, 434, okay? No question that is going to be a significant number we're talking about. But 23,000 child protection cases in the Northern Territory, that was last year. But again, there is no chat about this. And clearly there is a failure, because we all know that there's not a well-meaning person in all levels of government, all levels of the bureaucracy, all levels of non-government organisations trying to help. But the help ain't working. And that means there's something else going on. So, I know it's a 3-hour answer, but where do you see the block between the well-meaning, the money and the results?
Well, the block is the fact that all of these protests, everything that we're seeing, is born out of identity politics. The focus has been put onto racism. If you actually speak facts and truth, you are called a racist. Our politicians want votes in order to remain in power. So people are not prepared to speak the truth because it could hurt their careers. We've got an industry which is basically itself dependent on government welfare. And if we actually solved these problems by taking responsibility ourselves, these industries would disappear, the funds would disappear, they'd be no longer necessary. We saw it with COVID. Everyone was faced with one problem together. Didn't matter what your colour was. We're all faced with it. Everything went quiet. And so these arguments became insignificant. But, now that they've been brought back into the spotlight, it's like there's this thirst going on where people want to feel like they're somehow important again. And it's a horrible cycle that continues, and the ignorance is gobsmacking. It's absolutely gobsmacking, the ignorance that is being bred through the left right now, and the continuation of the misery of little kids who are out of sight, out of mind. You don't get to see the assault, the sexual assault on camera being live streamed and beamed into people's hands around the world. You don't get to see that. So you don't care about it. And you don't care because the perpetrators are also black. And that's the big problem. People only care if there is seen to be a white perpetrator.
Well, because it's this thing where, I have one group of people that I really want to challenge. One group of people, which is, we know that there is a very passionate feminist community in Australia who will go after anyone and any perceived wrongings. These people are silent when it comes to the abuse that you cop. The people who are the abusers of you get rewarded with gigs, like the bloke who gets rewarded with the gig in the AFL. If, again, this was some scenario where it was a white person who had thrown the type of Twitter abuse at any one of these people, the OAM crowd, they'd never work again. They wouldn't be getting more work. Instead, this case, it rolls on. And I remember there was a forum that you were at in Sydney, and it moves me to this day, which is that the revolution white women had to be able to be supported by their society and for their brothers and sisters and their neighbours to know what's right and what's wrong, never made it to Tennant Creek, never made it to Alice Springs. And my challenge to them is, don't go with a Twitter tour, like reach out and talk to people like Jacinta to go, okay, use the power that you have been able to use the sisterhood for in the city that's policing what gets said on television, and use it to change communities where women are suffering.
Exactly. And, in the beginning of this year, I sat through a court case to support a 16-year-old victim of sexual abuse in my family. She had been repeatedly raped by her own father from the age of 14. And there were only 2 other female members of our family supporting her, plus myself and my mother. And in the courtroom, we sat listening. The bravest people I know are young girls like her cousin who was a witness that came forward, a 13-year-old who was built like a 9-year-old because she was born with FASD, who came forward to give evidence against the rapist, even though this was the most daunting thing that they could imagine themselves going through. These individuals are who are brave to me. And no other family members came forward to support these young girls. And while the court case was going on, their grandmother, whose house the young girl lived in when this took place, when the rapes took place, encouraged her other son to attack my cousin, who had first brought her forward to police to make a report and who also stood as a witness. So she was attacked with an axe in the primary school, mind you. And this was encouraged by her very own grandmother. This is the reality of the circumstances that goes on in remote communities that these protesters care zero for. They do not care one bit. They stand there virtue signalling and acting as though they are so terribly sorry for, the racism that Aboriginal people are faced with. It's not racism that is sexually abusing our kids, and it is not racism that is killing our people. It is the actions of our own people. And again, if we want to see a reduction in incarceration rates because we're the world's most incarcerated people, then we have to stop the murderers and the rapists in our own communities and in our own families. Why don't these protesters go in and sit in a courtroom and support a 16-year-old and her 13-year-old cousin while they give evidence in order that they might get justice served, and in order that perhaps, hopefully, the judge won't provide a lenient sentence to the perpetrator because he's black and they don't want to be seen as being racist.
Jacinta, I love you. I hate that we have to say you're brave for saying what you say because, this is stuff that is unexceptional to say in the suburbs and the well-heeled places or the places that produce the kids that were out there on the weekend. There's 100,000 of them around the country. Do what Jacinta just said. Of the 100,000, go and sit in that courtroom. Go and reach out. Go and talk to people and talk to some of the people who you may not normally reach out to hear from. Jacinta, I love talking to you. I look forward to doing it very soon.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Isn't she the best? Jacinta Price, she's a brave lady, as is her mum, and I hate that we have to call her brave. And her bravery is that the establishment tears her apart. I guarantee the conversation you have just seen will cause her pain for weeks to come, as the very same Twitter mob that was chanting and cheering for what they saw in their feeds on the weekend will tear her limb from limb. Because she's talking about the way to stop something happening into the future, to stop doing something that means you come into contact with the police. It all starts at home. So my challenge to the feminists of this country is put your swords down because you heard her talking here and reach out to her tonight to learn something from her. Don't confront her, defend her. Because what she is doing is she is defending the little girls who have every right to grow up to be whatever the hell they want to be, just as your kids do where you live. More after the break.